There is not a more miserable program in college football than the Kent State Golden Flashes. The team from Ohio has really not been able to figure things out recently, and it's somehow only gotten worse. They already had the worst team and the worst coach in college football, and he managed to get fired and ended up getting fired for some odd reasons. Kent State is truly a dumpster fire in the doormat of college football, and at this point they deserve a rewind, and at this point I want to do a deep dive on why this team is so bad and the mess that they are currently in. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the Kent State football disaster. So going back in time, Kent State recently went ahead and fired their coach, Kenny Burns. Not only was he 1-23 as the head coach of the Golden Flashes over these last couple of years, but he's also under investigation for possible fraud and/or debt. A handful of months ago, a bank in Ohio sued him for over $23,000, but even without that, he went 1-11 last year and 0-12 this year after coming over from Minnesota. Kent State was rumored to be in such a bad financial situation, they'd have to consider whether or not to voluntarily step down from the MAC and to the FCS. But even just a few years ago, Kent State wasn't this bad, and under Sean Lewis, they were serious MAC conference title contenders and a tough out for anyone they were playing. What happened between then and now, and why is Kent State always in need of a complete rebuild every few years? Well, Kent State is actually one of the least competitive teams in FBS history, as it took them 8 years of trying before they successfully started their first football program back in 1920. From the jump, they were one of the worst college football programs in the state of Ohio, and the best season they had from their start in 1920 to when they paused the team during World War II was when they went 8-1 in the Division III Ohio Athletic Conference. They joined the MAC in 1951, becoming the 9th team to join. Head coach Trevor Reese coached the team from 1946 to 63, winning 92 games, and he's honestly one of the best coaches they've ever had. He took the team to one bowl game in 1954, and Kent State went 8-2 and went to the Refrigerator Bowl, which they lost to Delaware. Kent State would not make another bowl game until 1972, when they won their first MAC Conference championship after going 6-5-1 under Don James. They lost the Tangerine Bowl to Tampa, who doesn't even have a football team anymore. After that, Coach James left for Washington, and Kent State would not make another bowl game until 2012. They'd follow that season up by going 9-2 and finishing second in the MAC in 1973, but they didn't win more than 6 games in a season until Glenn Mason took them to 7-4. But he left for Kansas right after that, and Kent State fell right back down to 5-6, and they would not win more than 6 games once again until that 2012 season. To put how bad Kent State is into perspective, let me tell you the records they've had under their head coaches after Reese. They went 16-21 under Leo Strange, then 9-21 under Dave Puddington, 25-19 under Don James, 18-16 under Dennis Fitzgerald, 8-25 under Ron Blackledge, 4-18 under Ed Schalbeck, 12-10 under Glenn Mason, 7-25 under Dick Kroom, 3-30 under Pete Cordelli, 8-35-1 under Jim Corrigal, 17-51 under Dean Peace, and 29-53 under Doug Martin. Overall, from 1964 to 2010, Kent State was 164, 350-4, meaning they won just 32% of their games. This didn't mean Kent State didn't have some good players in their system, though, as Josh Cribbs played quarterback for Kent State from 2001 to 2004, and in 4 years he threw for 7,000 yards and 45 touchdowns, while also rushing for nearly 4,000 yards and 38 scores. There was also some hope in 2006, as they had Julian Edelman as their quarterback. But honestly, he was a turnover magnet, as while he did throw for 5,000 yards, he had 31 interceptions compared to 30 touchdowns. He's also a pretty dang good athlete, and we know he ended up moving to wide receiver with the Patriots and did pretty good. But then the Golden Flashes went out on a limb and hired Darrell Hazel in 2011. Coach Hazel had been the assistant head coach at Ohio State since 2005 and had also coached their receivers. During that time frame, he learned under head coach Jim Tressel and was on staff for 2 national title game appearances. He's actually considered a pretty hot coaching prospect, and he was only 47 when he was hired without any head coaching experience. In his first year as the Kent State head coach, he took the Golden Flashes to a 5-7 season, which is the same they had gone before in 2010. They honestly had one of the worst scoring offenses in college football, only scoring 17 points per game, but they did have the 49th best scoring defense, allowing 24 points per game. In 2012, Kent State absolutely exploded. They finished the regular season at 11-1, with their only loss coming against Kentucky and Lexington. They went completely undefeated through the MAC during the regular season, and even knocked off number 18 Rutgers 35-23. The offense finished ranked 35th, scoring over 33 points per game. The weird thing is, their quarterbacks weren't even good. Their starter, Spencer Keith, threw for just over 2,000 yards with 12 touchdowns. But running backs Dre Archer and Trajan Durham were a cheat code. Archer had 1,500 yards and 16 touchdowns, and he averaged more than 9 yards per carry. Durham, on the other hand, had 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns, and what was even crazier is that Archer was his backup. But Kent State fizzled down the stretch, as they ended up losing the MAC title game to Northern Illinois, and then lost their bowl game to Arkansas State. But the reason for their losses might have been because Coach Hazel was already out the door. He left to take over at Purdue in 2013, and Kent State went right back to being bad, and didn't make another bowl game until 2019 under Sean Lewis. Coach Lewis had been hired at Kent State in 2018 after spending 2 years as the offensive coordinator at Syracuse. When he was hired at Kent State, the offense shifted from run first to pass first. He went 2-10 in 2018 before going 6-6 in 2019. They won their first ever bowl game against Utah State, and they only played 4 games in 2020, but went back to a bowl game in 2021. That season was great as they went 7-5 and made their second MAC title game appearance. They once again lost it to Northern Illinois and then lost their bowl game to Wyoming. But this was the kind of success that Kent State football was looking for, and this was the first time they had sort of had it. Even with a down year in 2022, they still went 5-7 and was in the middle of one of their best stretches ever. But then Coach Lewis left Kent State to become the offensive coordinator with Coach Prime at Colorado in 2023, and the Golden Flashes were once again looking for a new head ball coach. That's when they turned to Kenny Burns. Coach Burns had been coaching running backs at Minnesota since 2017, where he coached guys like Rod Smith and Mo Ibrahim. He had spent most of his coaching career under PJ Fleck, who used to be the head coach at Western Michigan, so Kent State was familiar with the style of teams that Coach Fleck had. They were hoping to get some of Coach Fleck's MAC success to trickle down to them, but Coach Burns would turn out not to be the guy for them. He took Sean Lewis's players from 5-7 to 1-11 in his first year, and they were literally the worst team in football. They only scored 14 points per game, which was the worst in the entire FBS, and allowed 35 points per game, which was the 11th worst in the FBS. They had 3 starting quarterbacks who combined for 1,900 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 6 picks, and their leading rusher, Gavin Garcia, only had about 500 yards and 2 touchdowns. It would not get any better in 2024, as in fact, things got worse, and they were once again the worst team in the FBS. The Flashes went 0-12, scored just 13 points per game, and this was the worst in the country, and allowed 44 points per game, which was also the worst in the country. The 2024 Kent State Golden Flashes might honestly have pushed for being the worst FBS football team of all time. But how did it get this bad? Well, honestly, there are a few reasons for this, but the main one is something that other MAC schools have had to deal with, but are generally better at handling, and that is that they always lose a good head coach once they get one. The only good head coach they've ever had who stuck around was Coach Reese, but that was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they weren't even FBS. Don James did pretty well, but immediately left for Washington, and a whole bunch of bad head coaches later. Glenn Mason was their first glimmer of hope, and then Darrell Hazel left for Purdue. What's sad is that Hazel was probably the worst coach in Purdue football history, so he should have stayed at Kent State, and Sean Lewis was also awesome, but he quickly left Colorado in favor of San Diego State. Like I said, other MAC schools have also had to deal with this, but they seem to be able to find new head coaches a little bit easier than Kent State does. Take Toledo for example. They went from Nick Saban to Gary Pinkel, and then ended up with Tim Beckman, Matt Campbell, and Jason Candle back to back to back. The MAC ends up being a proving ground for a lot of untested head coaches, and that's really how they keep getting new coaches in and out of the conference, but Kent State just has not had any luck there. It doesn't help they have to share the Cleveland area with Akron, and both of these are absolutely terrible programs. Akron has not made a bowl game since 2017, and they haven't won one since 2015, and they've only been to 3 ever. Going forward, Kent State doesn't really have the athletics department budget to go out and hire a new head coach, so they just elevated their offensive coordinator, Mark Carney, to the interim head coaching position. I don't really think he'll be able to turn the team around this upcoming season, but if he does, you would think Kent State would extend him, but they don't really have the money to go out and get anyone else. To be honest with you guys, things look pretty bad for their football program, and apparently their entire athletics department as a whole. If I were them and I had the money, I would somehow, some way go get a decent coach, but at the same time, who the heck is going to want to go there? They're terrible, they're dysfunctional, they have no NIL, and they're considered the doormat of college football right now. That's a near impossible situation for any coach, let alone a talented one, and if you have the option, why would you be the head coach at Kent State when you could go coach tight ends at South Carolina or something? I mean, Sean Elliott was the head coach at Georgia State, and he was somewhat successful, and that's literally exactly what he did. It is so hard to be a coach at one of these schools, and I would say it's near impossible for Kent State. Kenny Burns ended up flaming out in an embarrassing way, and just made things look a lot worse for Kent State. Honestly, I do hope Kent State can figure things out at some point, but if things continue to crash for them, they may lose so much money and lose so much momentum, they end up back at the FCS level. That'd honestly be very sad to see, and would definitely be a big loss for the MAC, but at the same time, Kent State is going underwater, and the ship doesn't look to be rightened anytime soon. But what do you guys think? If you're a Kent State football fan, if there really are any, why are you guys so bad, and how do you turn things around? Also, if you're a fan of another school, how do you think Kent State fixes this mess, and what other program should I do a spotlight on next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen, including my video about UMass. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.